welcome to the Vigilate Dialogues. I am your host, Shaina Smith, welcoming you to the National Boardroom. This evening on our program, as always, we'll be talking about a topic that affects our quality of life here in the Virgin Islands. And we're not going to just talk about problems, but we're going to talk about the solutions. The Vigilate Dialogues is sponsored by National Bank of the Virgin Islands and Smith & Associates. Now, for the year, we've been talking about nation building and different aspects of our society and its development. And tonight we will continue in that vein, and I have a very interesting topic that my guest is going to be sharing with us. And I'll introduce her, I'll let her introduce herself. There you go.
Good evening. My name is Lorna Dawson. Former educator. You can say I'm still in education, but at presently the Ministry of Health organized an autism program for both adults and children with autism. So I am the director of that program.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here, Miss Lorna.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about the Autism Center a little bit later on in the hour. But I'd like you to share with us, you sent me some articles and some background information. And when I was looking for a subtitle for the program tonight, I wrote down, "Everyone Can Learn." So I'm thinking tonight we're going to talk about learning and some other things in terms of how it is impacting us as a people. I know there's something to do with culture in there, and I've been talking about that quite a bit with some of my other guests. So it's going to be great to see how we weave everything together.
Okay, I'll try my best.
All right. So let's, this is your topic. Jump right in. Let's go.
Okay. For quite a while, I've caught your show on and off, and I've realized that you've been speaking about culture a lot. And very often you hear a lot of talk about we need to bring back our culture. We're not passing on our culture. And one of the concerns I've had is, yes, the culture is important, but what is it about our culture that we want to pass on? And how do we go about passing it on? Because a lot of the things that we are thinking are important are not things that our children or young people are thinking are relevant or important to them. And when I first moved to education department to work, I was responsible for special education. And we were having quite a bit of challenges. The number of children who were having difficulties learning were increasing. Teachers were getting more and more frustrated, and parents needed help. And at the time, we didn't really have special education teachers assigned in the system. So I was dealing with the administrative aspect as well as being, I was what you say,
in the classroom.
Right, not especially in the classroom, but having to go to the classroom, having to provide solutions. And so I started trying to find something that can help meet all these different needs and demands that were being placed on me. And I came across, I had heard about him before, the work of an Israeli psychologist named Reuven Feuerstein. And Mrs. Medita Whitley, who is a lecturer at the college, I had mentioned him to her, and she was at UNESCO at the time, and she came across a workshop that was being done with him.
Okay.
So she told me about it, and two of us were able to go. And so after that, you can say I've become a Feuerstein disciple. And one of the things that caught me, when you start reading about his work started actually with children from the Holocaust who had migrated to Israel, and they were having, especially like from Ethiopia and North Africa, they were having a lot of difficulties settling in, and many of them were not adjusting to the school system.
Okay.
And so when they tested them, they came out with very low IQs and were considered to be mentally retarded. And Feuerstein was charged with working with these young people to help them integrate into the system. And as he worked with them, him being a survivor of the Holocaust himself, what he concluded was that it's not so much that they were retarded per se, but that their performance is what was retarded, and that was a result of what he called a missing link or lack of mediated learning experience. Now, he explained mediated learning experience as basically a human being standing between the learner and whatever information that person is trying to learn, and trying to help them make sense of it. And one example that I like to give that really brought home to me the importance of mediated learning was when I was teaching some years ago. We were doing a lesson on animals or something like that. And this one child said, "Teacher, I saw a camel in Rotown today."
I saw that in the article.
You know,
yeah.
and some saying, "Well, how do you mean you saw a camel? Where did you?" He said, "I saw a camel in Rotown." And around that time, Mr. Franklin Daly had these.
The llamas.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, we was, as a class, we now discussing and we speculating, you know, maybe you saw this. He said, "No, it wasn't at BVI, it was in Rotown." And after I dug around a bit, I realized that he had seen a picture of a camel. Right, it was advertising a camel cigarette, and they had a poster of a camel on the door. So I said, "Oh, that was just a picture of a camel," and I moved on with my lesson. I didn't know about mediating at the time. I didn't know about taking it beyond that and begin to ask him, well, what other examples, where else do we find examples where we have a depiction of, you know, real things, you know, and then we could have come up with television, in books, or whatever. So in the midst of the lesson, we go on forward, and the lesson, this little voice pipes up. "There ain't nothing if Tattoo Line have camel. I know St. Thomas got lion and tiger." So, how did you come to that conclusion? And then he said, "Well, I see it on TV." And he was speaking about Channel 12, which broadcasts from St. Thomas. So to his mind, he's watching TV. He knows it's coming from St. Thomas. So everything he sees on Channel 12 is happening in St. Thomas, you know? And so you could see how very often children sit, they watch things on television, and there's no one there with them helping them make sense, helping them to interpret. And a lot of, like, getting off the point a bit, but a lot of, like, the cartoons and so that you come on Channel 37, you see a lot of the characters being disrespectful to the adults and the parents and that sort of thing. And most time children are watching them by themselves. So there's nobody there, no adult around, say, well, you know, right, to mediate and say, well, you see how that child is behaving? That's not the way you're supposed, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So he found, well, it was because of this lack of mediation, because their lives had been disrupted by war and that sort of thing. And then I started to think of the problems we were having. You know, initially I said, well, we didn't have war. But then when I started to look at the problems we were having, I said, okay, we didn't have war, but we had a rapid burst in development, which basically ended up with the same thing. You had where all of a sudden, a big shift. You had mothers going out to work, grandmothers working. You had a large migrant population, so in essence, you didn't have that support structure that you had before. So we actually have a set of children who are actually growing up without people around mediating, helping them to make sense of things, out of children coming home to the house, you know, what you call latchkey children, and they're fending for themselves until the adults get home. When the adults get home, you know, they're tired. It's just basically time to complete homework, complete projects, and you move on. So a lot of the conversations and so that used to take place is not taking place anymore.
And I found that very interesting in terms of when I was, you know, it was being explained in the article as far as that quality time in terms of the adult-child interaction and explaining things to them about their world around them and what they're seeing. Because, you know, just like how the child communicated when he saw a camel, he did see a camel. But then he needs to learn that, you know, there are pictures, and pictures don't necessarily are the real thing.
Real thing, right.
So you have to know how to communicate, well, I saw a picture of a camel, rather than saying he saw a camel right away. So, but yeah, I totally agree, you know, with where I can see that shift happening in the society, and the shift happening in terms of our parenting styles. You know, and that interaction now between parent and child, or adults and children, you know, because I grew up in an extended family. And, you know, it caused me to reflect, too, on the fact that I interacted so much with the adults. You know, whether it's grandparents, uncles, aunts, you know, all older than me, that, you know, were able to explain, well, this is why this is like this, or this is why, you know, we do this like this, and those types of things.
And the extended family, as you said, taught you a lot of things. And nowadays, I don't think there's as much emphasis on families, or even you have lots of family reunions taking place. But very often if you go, you would find the older folks in one corner reminiscing about the good old days, and then the young people over in another corner, and they're there with their different, gadgets, playing this game and that game. So they're still not benefiting from, you know, what these other people have learned. So I started to ask myself, and it's something we've discussed when I was in education in student services unit. We would have some lunchtime talks and talking, okay, what do? We can't roll back the hands of time. We can't carry children back to, okay, you need to shift the goat, because by shifting the goat, you develop patience. You know, when that knot is tangled up, responsibility, you have to take the time to untangle that knot, because you can't go home and tell your father that you didn't get the goat shifted. You know, responsibility, you have a certain time that you have to get it done, and you have to get it done and still get to school early. So we can't carry them back and say, well, we're giving everybody a goat. But then those were things that we learned as a result of those chores, the responsibility, the value of time, perseverance until a job is done. So then we have to start thinking, well, in this age that we're living in, what can we do? What do we need to be doing to ensure that our children still have these values?
Yeah, that's very key. Okay. That's very key. So based on the work, or at least with the workshop that you guys have went in terms of the mediative learning environment, is this something that we've incorporated into the school system, or is it in only certain areas?
Well, I wouldn't say it's fully incorporated. Quite a number of persons, teachers have been trained over the years. I can say it's being fully implemented at Eslin Henley Racial Learning Center, because the principal was probably among like the third person from the territory to go on her own and get training. While she was in England, she took advantage and she went and she got some training. So when she came back, and she met on staff 2 persons who also had training. So she was able to, you know, really get it going. And since then she has facilitated the rest of her staff being trained. So they have it on board. One of the challenges that we have had over the years, we've had a lot of exposure, and I think it happens with a lot of training that is done, is that we don't have we have not been able to have the capacity to have coaches on site to help us develop our practice, because most of the other persons that I've met who've gone on training, say like from the US, they have persons who have been established in the practice. They've gone to Israel and done attachment, so it's like part of them. So when I train, somebody's trained in New York, there's somebody coming in every month or every 2 months to come and observe you and help you over the humps with your practice. That's a challenge that we have had. We just had each other to strengthen, and sometimes we're not consistent in what we're doing. One of the things that they've started recently, the Feuerstein Institute, is that they've now have continuing professional development online. That's recently started, so I've just enrolled, and I'm hoping that that would help me to strengthen my skills, because I think it's very important. It's a very important skill for people to have, and I would like to be able to train persons to be able to do it.
And then continue, because then I'm sure new developments happen every year. So it's something that you have to continually keep abreast.
Right. And it's something that I think is like present in at least over 70 countries in the world. The last conference that I went to was in Paris in 2012. There were about 4 of us there. And there were, I think, about 34 countries, different countries represented. We, so far, for any that have gone to, we have been the only English-speaking Caribbean country. Santo Domingo has now started, and it's actually like introduced in one of the universities, but it's private. It's not in the government. It's a Catholic university. One of the things is that when people hear it, it sounds like it's too good to be true. You know, that something like this can't be happening, and this man's philosophy that everybody has an opportunity to improve their learning, to learn. And so the mainstream persons or the traditionalists usually reject it. The first time I heard about him, about Reverend Feuerstein, I was in university in Birmingham, and a student from Yemen mentioned him. And I remember specifically the lecturer at the time said, oh, he's this man from Israel who believes everybody can learn, you know, and he just dismissed it like that.
Yeah.
So the young lady said to me, I'm going to send you his name and the information, but she never did. But after I came home, I came across in a catalog, I came across a book called Changing Children's Minds. And when I read, I said, this must be the same person that she was speaking to. So I bought the book and I kept, you know, sort of reading. And it wasn't until Mrs. Wheatley introduced me to that conference that I actually linked up with trainers.
Okay.
So I've been keeping, you know, close working relationship with them. If I have a problem, I can email or I can call, say, okay, how do I deal with this?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, cultural deprivation, as described by Feinstein. This is one of the points that you mentioned.
Right. Okay. Culture, he talks about cultural difference and cultural deprivation. Okay, cultural difference is somebody migrates to the BVI, they might have, the culture is different.
Yeah.
But because their cultures have been passed on to them, their values and that sort of thing, it's easy for them to adapt. They have the groundwork, the framework for learning. And we saw it often in school where you have a large Spanish population. And you have some children would come, they have challenges with the language, but once they master that language, they fly, you can't hold them back. And then you have others, even though they master the language, they struggle, okay? So it's not so much the culture itself that is a problem there, but there's some sort of deprivation.
Okay.
And what he's saying that the deprivation might come from something that's organic, you know, you might have Down syndrome, you might have had a traumatic injury or whatever.
Okay.
Or it could be from that absence of mediation, not having persons really talking to you about what's happening around you, helping you to make sense of what is going on. Okay, and that lays the foundation for learning, enabling you to problem solve, enabling you to pick out relevant information when you need to deal with something, helping you to understand your spatial orientation, your relationship with someone else in space, in time, and that sort of thing.
So basically, like, your analytical skills.
Right.
Those are things that we start to develop from a very early age.
Very early age, and it develops because of the interaction that you have with persons. And since we started talking about coming on the show, I went back to Dr. Catherine Smith. She had a lecture at the college someday, and she spoke about the values and that sort of thing. So I got the values that are in our draft cultural policy.
Okay.
And some of them were like God-fearing and serving, family, respect, honesty, integrity, cooperation, collaboration, living within means, self-help, a good mix of dependence and independence, a strong work ethic. And so I started speaking to some older folks about, okay, how did you get it? Because your parents didn't come and sit you. I'm teaching you a strong work ethic. You know, I'm teaching you to be honest. I'm teaching you to be respectful and that sort of thing. But in the activities that took place, these are the values that you sort of develop. So one person said, for example, you had learned to work for what you want, because back then everybody was poor. Basically, everybody was poor. So it wasn't like you just hand, oh, mommy, I want this. You work for what you want, and you know, you learn not to envy what somebody else had. One teacher just said to me today, a famous saying among the Virgin Islanders was, mother has, father has, mother has, God bless. Right, okay?
Who has
and you learn that whatever you want, you have to work for it. And when you listen to those things and you see those kind of things, you remember, I don't know if you ever heard a story about this boy who had set a butterfly free from in a cocoon. And soon afterward, the butterfly died because he took away the struggle. He's in struggling to get out of the cocoon, that is gain strength in the wings. And very often I look at what's happening with our children, and I say, we are doing the same thing to them. We are taking away the ability to fight and to, you know, go through struggles that will make them strong, that will make them better problem solvers by just giving them everything that they want. You know, the neighbor has this, the neighbor has that. Just before we came on show, Andrew and I had a
show before the show. Pre-show.
And you know, he would mention the fact that, you know, people were poor, so so you depended on God, and that's another faith. Thing that as Virgin Islanders we developed faith. You know, my grandmother said to me, when we were growing up, everybody was poor. When you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you prayed. And somehow it would come, you know, somebody would come and bring something. She said, but nowadays, everybody has money. So we don't have time for God because we think
we could get up and go and do.
Right. And he even took it a step further. He said, oh, long ago when you didn't have money to pay somebody, you go and work for them or something. Now you get your credit card and you go and you and you get
and that's developing now a habit of living on what you don't have.
Right.
You know, versus when you talk to young people about hanging your hat as high as your head, they have no clue what it is you're talking about. And I know even, you know, in my age group, that there are some parents that, you know, if they didn't grow up around their grandparents especially, that they can't relate to sayings like that, because those are things now that were passed on as part of oral tradition. So it's very, very important. Very important.
And even she mentioned along with working with for what you want, you also had a job to do. You had to do it well, you know, or you would have to keep do it over until it met your parents' satisfaction. And nowadays, anything goes. Just last night, I was helping a child with a project, and she had to do make something using at least 5 different geometrical shapes. So she made a house.
Okay.
And she was putting a roof on, and she had masking tape put in underneath. So I said to her, why don't you look for some Scotch tape? So she said, nobody ain't looking under there. I said, it doesn't matter that no one is looking under there. You're doing a job, so do it well. You know, whether someone is going to turn it over or not, that doesn't matter. The point is you're doing something, make sure you do it to the best of your ability, that it looks as good as it could look. You know, but that's, you know, those are things that we have to get instilled in them and find ways of getting it in.
And for me, what I find myself saying a lot these days, and it's part of when I do training, especially with leadership, that you have to be intentional about stuff like this. Because whatever. Welcome back. You're tuned in to the Vigilate Dialogues. I'm your host, Shaina Smith. And here in the boardroom tonight, we're talking about how everyone can learn and how we do learn. You know, whether you have disabilities or not, that's important to mention, because I think some people think, you know, you have to have, is a disability that you have some kind of physical or physiological disability that affects your learning, but there, you know, there are other aspects to it in terms of how we do learn, and when the environment isn't, you know, optimal, what can happen and how it affects us. So, talking about, we left off talking about, I think I mentioned in terms of cultural deprivation, it was 2 parts to it. There was a cultural difference and there was the deprivation.
So deprivation is a lack of mediated learning experience. Okay, so when you're deprived of, when you don't have the kind of interaction or adequate or proper interaction, then you end up with some deficiencies, what we call cognitive deficiencies. And when they're there, then that creates challenges in learning. One of the things that he had found was that, as you mentioned, disability, people tend to think, okay, that my child has a disability, so therefore he can't learn anything. And therefore you don't mediate. And that is when you need to mediate. That is when you need to step up the mediation.
Because then we tend to get impatient and say, well, you're not understanding, but you know, it's going to take time in terms of explaining to them to get them to that level of understanding.
When he himself had a grandson who was born with Down syndrome, he had been, you know, talking about this for quite a while. And then he got a grandson with Down syndrome, and he said, yes, now I can really show the world what I'm talking about. So, and I think the child is in college now or something like that. He went to regular school. He had to repeat, you know, classes because he was delayed, but they mediated with him and along with the classmates, and so he did very well. And I had an aunt who, well, we don't really know, she had a disability, and she had tetanus as a baby, and we believe that led to brain injury. So she came out, she was, but at that time, what you would call mentally retarded. But my grandmother, although she wasn't a psychologist or anything, she must have had some inkling because she was a good mediator. The first thing she did was that when other people were keeping their children at home, she sent her to the village school because she said she will learn how to interact with other people.
Okay.
Okay? And she made sure when the others who were going to school, her siblings, things were tight, she would make sure that she was well dressed. Because she already looking kind of funny, so I have to make sure she going out looking good.
Yeah.
You know, and she walked and spoke with her so that she learned to speak. She used to take her to the beach, there behind the wet sand, to strengthen the muscles. Eventually she learned to walk. She learned to walk and speak after her younger brother.
Wow.
But they didn't give up on her. You know, they continued working with her, and
yeah.
that's without her knowing. So now, you know, sometimes you see children, you say, well, you need to be speaking more with the child, not because he's not answering you back, you know, not because he can't communicate the way you think you should communicate. Now is a time when you actually need to be stepping up how you interact with that child. Speak to them like you speak to any other child. Tell them what you're doing. Explain what's happening, why you're doing it, why you're making this decision and that sort of thing. And it's helping them to process. They're learning. They might not be able to speak it out to you, but they might have to learn some other means of communicating what they're thinking to you, but they're learning. You know, so that's very important. And that's where the deprivation, that's what he calls culturally deprived. And I think they said when he first introduced it in the States back in like the 60s, people actually walked out of the, the training because like, where you coming from telling us that we are culturally deprived? Yeah. You know, but it wasn't in that sense, you know, feel well, you're below or anything like that. Just that the level of interaction that you need to be having with your children, you're not having them. And the things that he was saying all along is that this stimulation, the communication and talking, so actually helps to develop the brain. It's now in the 90s that neuroscience is actually proving what he's saying, that your IQ doesn't have to stay at 60 all your life. You know, you can improve. It develops. You can learn to learn. And as bright as we are, as intelligent as we think we are, everybody has that capacity to step it up a notch and improve where we are.
And I saw that, I think, in one of the articles that you sent me, they were talking about teaching children to think about what they think about. So, again, when we talk about things like the TV, the internet, you know, the songs, whatever it is, all of those things are what we're calling stimuli that is coming at them, and their brain has to process on some level. And, you know, depending on their skill set, they're able to take in the good stuff, throw in the bad stuff. Or they might just be taking in everything and not know how to process it or how to think about certain things that they're hearing or seeing.
Right, and so that's where adults come in. And you know, sometimes we tend to tell children, oh, shut up, you're listening to stupidness. You know, but sometimes maybe we need to listen to it
to find out
what they're listening to and help them then choose, as you say, what is good about it or what's bad, you know, and help them with the selection process. So, you know, it's not everything we need to just shut them off throw it away like that, because they need help. If we don't do it, they're going to come away with their own meaning, which very often could be faulty.
And, you know, we were talking before the show, too, about, you know, how, again, people might think that we're talking negatively towards technology, but technology has its place, of course. But, you know, I get concerned, and I actually was talking about this over lunch with some family members about how we let our kids go into this virtual world. And when it comes time to interact with, you know, adults or children, they don't know. They don't know what to do or what to say, you know, and, you know, there's some that are shy, but it's something where you need to really pay attention to as far as the amount of time that they spend, you know, on the computer or playing video games and the type of games that they're playing, because it's not developing them, especially their social skills. So you have, you know, I think it was in an article you were talking about, or we mentioned it too with the reunions where, you know, where we have segregation by age, you know, by the generations, when we want them to be interacting so that they can learn from each other. Because now, you know, I have a godmother and she's in her 70s and she has an iPad Air, but at the same token, you know, she's able to sit us down and talk to us about this is how I grew up, these are the things that I learned, and we learn from her life. Just like how she had to learn about the current age that she's now living in.
Right.
You know, so there's that give and take. And I think that also helps with the generation gap, you know, because that's part of, I think, where we're talking about losing culture. There is the generation gap that's there. Because we let our kids get away with a lot of stuff that, you know, I couldn't get away with it. I don't even know what to start with that.
That's another show by
Yeah,
itself. That's
yeah,
another show. And,
it is.
and what is frightening is that these children will in turn have children. So what are they going to be
Pass it
teaching
on,
them? What are
yeah.
they going to be passing it on, passing on, you know? So we really have to really take stock and, you know, ensure that we are sharing these values,
being
sharing
intentional
and be intentional.
intentional.
And it's
So
interesting that you should say that, because the Foyson gives some criteria for mediation, because it's not every interaction is mediational.
Yeah.
And the 3 important parts of making an interaction mediational is intentionality and reciprocity. Okay? I have an interaction with you, I am intentional in what I want you to learn, and I make sure that I put it across in such a way so that you can reciprocate, okay? And then it must have meaning. And another thing is to be able to transfer whatever you've learned from this situation to the next.
And really be, and the whole thing of intentional, just to give people an example, it's like, say for example, in America, you have areas like referred to as Chinatown or Little Sicily. And it's not just speaking about the population that's there, but it's talking about the way of life that they have been very, you know, persistent about maintaining. So even though they're in America, when it comes to things like family and the foods and, you know, how they think about life and what's important to them, their values, they maintain those things and they make sure they pass them on down to the next generation. So that they know that, you know, it's not just about saying, well, you need to go and marry somebody from our country or things like that, but that they understand what's important and who they are as a particular ethnicity or nationality. And I think that's where, you know, that's a place we need to get to.
That's where, and we need to have some conversation. That's why I think Kathy's discussions were quite good. You know, what defines us as Virgin Islanders, and not being ashamed of who we are. And you know, we were mentioning the fact that Virgin Islanders, when back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, when everybody was poor, God was everything. You know, you called on God for everything. Lord, have mercy. Lord, send help. I mean, now people say, Lord, send help.
Yeah, but it was really prayer. They were praying.
And answers came. Food when you didn't know where the next meal was coming from.
Or what to do next with a situation.
You got answers. Solutions came.
Yeah.
And so we have to be careful now that we are not ashamed to hold on and continue trusting that God who our grandparents trusted in. Yeah. You know, and not because other people are coming and saying, don't you have no God, and you know, that sort of thing, or you think it's God provide that, that sort of thing, you know. We don't have to.
No. If that's our value, that's our value.
That's our value, and we need to hold on to it.
Definitely. Definitely. So what are some of the things that we need to be looking at, let's say as parents and teachers, in terms of, you know, the different things that we've talked about? Obviously, number one on the list is stop putting the children in a corner with an iPad in their hand. I get a little annoyed. I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. But I don't like when you see adults take children out, and instead of having them, again, interact with what's going on, listen to what the speaker is saying, or, you know, if they gone to a play, you know, engage them. And afterwards, now you can have a conversation on the way home about what happened and see if they have any questions about what they may have heard. And, you know, places like church, we can't say we want godly children and then we allow them to be distracted throughout the whole of the church service, because they go to school now and they're looking for that same type of entertainment. And, you know, they have an attention deficit, not because they have a physical something going on with them, but it's what they're doing in the rest of, in the other parts of their life.
Well, one of the things that I would say I think is really important is the communication and the interaction that we have with children. I know the pressures of life. I mean, the cost of living is high, so you have different jobs, you have a lot of pressures. And I think sometimes we have to prioritize because a lot of children nowadays, they don't have time for anything else. They're involved in dance, they're involved in sport, karate, all sorts of extracurricular. So there isn't a whole lot of time for, just a sit down, a break, and interaction. So then you have to actually be intentional and create those opportunities where you can have discussions with your children.
And they have a good opportunity coming up with the holidays.
Yes.
Instead everybody stay home and just watch TV. You have some type of outing. Because again, when I reflect about like how my childhood was, that was a big thing for us. So it wasn't just about quantity of time. So yes, everybody's working Monday to Friday, sometimes Saturday, but it is about the quality of the time that's spent. So there were a few places by the time I was a teenager that I hadn't been in the BVI. And I'm sitting in class with people who hadn't been to Jost Van Dyke, and I'm like, what? How you live in the BVI and you haven't been, So it's like you have a different perspective just within this little environment here, much less if I've talked about going to Disney World. So it's important, I think, for parents to understand that, it's quality of the time. The quality time is very important, that you spend that time doing something that you get to interact and have communication and know what's going on with your children. And your children know what's going on with you.
Right. There's a saying that says that I prefer, let me have your presence and not your presence. That the presence is more important to me.
Yeah.
And as you said, the quality of your time, even while you're going to work, if you don't have a lot of time, that 10 minutes, 15-minute drive, you can make that count, rather than you driving.
You on the phone.
You on the phone, and then the iPad, and so you're not talking, you're not interacting. So that interaction is very important. Another thing is that if the child is having challenges, the more challenges you have, that's the time that you need to invest more time in questioning and having conversations with that child, and not just give up on the child. But another thing that I would say that we need to do is stop taking the struggle away from the children. Have them work for what they need sometimes. Well, not sometimes. Have them work for what they need, right? Not just everything that they want. I mean,
but you don't want to just hand it to them.
Yeah. And you have parents sometimes bending over backwards, putting themselves in debt.
Yeah.
For
them
so
to
that
be comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are things that something that they can do without. And if they actually realize, well, I really want this, and I need to work for it, I get a little summer job, I get a little after school job, on Saturdays I do chores for neighbors or whatever, and I get some money and I can get what I want. Then they can appreciate what they have. But you have things with children. I remember giving this guy a ride one day, and he has a fancy phone, more fancy than mine, and he's saying, they asked him if he's working. He said no. Well, are you actively looking for a job? Not really, because he wants to do a specific something, and he's not prepared to do something else until that becomes available. So it's also who paying for your phone and your money, your food and all of that. Every time I see you, your shoes matching your
outfit.
Shirt, right? My mother. And the mother has just a hotel work or seasonal work and that sort of thing, but yet she has to support this child. And you have children who understand, sad to say, actually curse their parents when their parents can't give them what they would like to give. They disrespect them, and we have to find ways of getting back to that.
Yeah.
One of the things that what teacher pointed out to me is that also long ago you had board games, and board games taught you a lot about
we had a stack this high.
Right, it taught you a lot about teamwork. You had a lot of social interaction. You respected others as you played and that sort of thing. And
teach sportsmanship.
Right, and I was coming at listening to Tom Joyner morning, and they were there arguing about asking the first person to call in who can tell me that they still have a board game in their house. And I drove and nobody called. And said,
Oh, wow.
because people don't use board games anymore.
Wow.
But board games are still valuable, and that's still, you know, you have your family get-togethers. Those are still ways that you can actually have some interaction.
Again,
and teach
holidays coming up, dust them off.
And
it's true because, and then as you said that too, I thought about it. I had two of my nieces made birthday a few months ago, and you know, those are the types of things that I look for them because you know they are overwhelmed with the technology. So you know, I bought one a pack of Go Fish. I don't know if everybody remember Go Fish, and the other one was some type of board game that taught counting, and you know, at the same time they were playing the game. So you know, those are the things, you know, when you're looking for birthday gifts, you know, these are all the things that are being intentional.
Right.
When, you know, you take that opportunity to give them something, expose them to something they may never have had, and you know, you go and you play with them, so you show them, you know, this is what this is.
And it's keeping it simple.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
And less stress.
So it's not like you have to pull out the chalkboard. I have to pull out the chalkboard, but through that interaction, you teach them some type of life skill that, you know, I can't sit down in a classroom and teach certain things. Like, you know, you could try, but there's some things that it really has to take place in that natural environment. But Lorna, we could stay here a whole another hour, but we're out of time. So let's give you a minute or two to wrap up in terms of what you know, how persons can contact you, where the Autism Center is located, should they have any other questions.
Okay. First of all, one of the questions I get asked is, well, what is autism? Autism is a type of disability, a neurological disorder, and it's usually manifested with problems with communication, problems with behavior, social interaction. And it's right now it's called autism spectrum disorder. A lot of other disorders that were previously called labeled otherwise and now come under the autism spectrum. It has been widened. So persons who you might have had a diagnosis with pervasive developmental disorder, that's now under autism spectrum. And the range is wide. You can have from very low functioning to very high functioning. And we at the Autism Center, we are located upstairs at Rainbow Children's Home in Lower Estate. Our number is 468-3672. We work with both adults and children. We see children on Mondays and Wednesdays, adults on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you have a child or an adult, anyone you suspect might have autism, might be on the spectrum, feel free to give us a call. We work with, in the center I have a special education teacher, and we have program aides who work regularly with the clients. But in addition to those, we have persons out in the schools, special education teachers, speech therapists, assistants, counselors, who have been trained in autism, and we call them members of the intervention team. So if you call in and say, well, I have a concern about this child, I will contact and see, well, which of these persons are available to come to the child's school or wherever that person is, make observation. We have screens that we use. And if that says, okay, yes, that seems to be the case, then we'll take it further and have a full diagnosis.
Great, awesome. Well, Lorna, thanks for being here and sharing this wealth of information. And, you know, I think the solution at the end of the day, we can safely say we can save our culture.
Yes, we can. You know, I said to Andrew,
it's not all lost.
It's not all lost.
No,
you
it's
know,
not.
Andrew, before we started, Andrew was saying how, you know, everybody was auntie and men. And so I said, well, all isn't lost, because if you notice, a lot of children nowadays are calling everybody's auntie this and uncle this. I said, I have my gray hair and people calling me granny, you know, but, and I heard actually say, well, she's not really my auntie, but because out of respect, I'm calling her auntie. So all isn't lost.
No, all isn't lost. It's still there in pockets, and I think, you know, it's for us to pick it up and continue with strengthening it, as it were. So, but we definitely have a follow-up discussion. So thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in to the dialogues tonight. Hope you gain a lot of information. I sure did, in terms of, you know, looking at where we are as a society and how we can make our quality of lives even better. So I am your host, as always, Shaina Smith, saying let's continue the change in conversation for a better Virgin Islands.